Hey guys, it's Kira and today I'm going to be getting started on another 24-hour readathon, which in and of itself is always kind of exciting but also kind of terrifying because, it's a lot of reading to do in 24 hours and it is quite a challenge. But today I'm even more terrified to get started on a 24-hour readathon because the book that I've decided to read this time around is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, and honestly I'm quite terrified about reading this book. I'd say when it comes to this readathon, I'm equal parts excited and terrified just because this book has been talked about by so many people, and the sort of overriding theme that everyone sort of talks about is how emotionally devastating this book is. I most recently heard about it actually from my friend Beth, who just finished reading it yesterday, and she said that it was incredible but absolutely devastating. And so I'm a little bit nervous. And then I also recently watched Kat from Paperback Dreams vlog about this book, and she is someone who reads a lot of dark books, a lot of horror and things like that, and she doesn't necessarily always seem to be very fazed by it, but she was even devastated by this book and ended up crying. So after those two reactions, I'm more than a little nervous to read this book. However, there are a lot of other things about this book that make me think that I'm really going to enjoy it. The thing that I think I'm going to like the most about it is the fact that it seems to be like a very detailed character study style novel where you really get to know these four main characters, and I'm really excited to get into that because that is something I really love. And also I don't necessarily find myself shying away from darker books because I do find those topics to be usually quite interesting. So I'm looking forward to reading it, but I really don't know what it's going to do to me emotionally, so we'll have to wait and see about that one. And to be honest, I'm not sure it's going to be a great idea to try and read this in 24 hours because that's a lot of emotion to put yourself through in one day. But we're all about the challenges here, so I'm going to try and read it in 24 hours. And I'm also buddy reading this alongside Em from alittlewriterem, so I don't think she's doing it as a 24-hour readathon. I kind of just decided to do this last minute, but we are going to be buddy reading it, so I'll at least have someone there as some emotional support who's also reading it at the same time as me. Now it's currently Friday evening. I've literally just gotten in from work, so I need to kind of settle in for the evening, have some dinner, get a few things done, and I'll be probably starting to read the book a little bit later on, maybe about 8 o'clock, but I just wanted to introduce it whilst there was still a little bit of natural light around. So really nervous but really excited to get into this book, and we will see what kind of emotional roller coaster I end up going on over the next 24 hours. So it's just turned 8 o'clock. I've got a huge cup of tea to keep me going, give me some energy, and also to be a bit of a comfort in case the book is like an emotional roller coaster right from the start. And of course I also have my giant copy of A Little Life with me, and I'm ready to get started on reading. I'm really looking forward to getting into it just because I finally want to start piecing the story together and understanding what everyone's talking about when they're going on about how emotional and intense this book is. But obviously I'm also a little bit nervous because really all I know about this book, aside from sort of its notoriety as such an emotionally devastating book, is basically that it's just about these four friends who moved to New York together. I believe they know each other from school or college, and it kind of just follows them along their lives. But I obviously know there must be a lot more to it than that because otherwise it wouldn't be such a acclaimed book. But I'm really not sure what to expect, so I'm looking forward to getting into it, and I'll of course keep you updated as I go and let you know all of my thoughts. so it is now just before 9:30, so I've been going for just about an hour and a half, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm definitely getting off to a slow start with A Little Life. I'm about 45 pages in now, which is pretty slow. Now partially that's because we're just getting introduced to these characters, and obviously we're going to be following them for quite a long time, so I think that the author is just kind of like really setting up the characters and just sort of really introducing them and their relationships with one another and just kind of getting the story off to a good start. So I'm kind of getting into it slowly by making sure that I'm not missing out on any details, but the main reason that I'm reading so slowly is because every couple of minutes I find my eyes just drifting off, because it's that time on a Friday evening where all I want to do is just go to sleep, which happens pretty much every time I do a 24-hour readathon, so I'm not too worried about it because I know that the evening is definitely not when I do my most reading, and I'll probably get more done in the morning. But I'm not giving up just yet, so I have moved from my original place on the sofa where I was definitely falling asleep into a new chair. So I'm thinking I might just like spin myself awake and maybe make another cup of tea to try and get some energy as well. So we'll see how that goes, and hopefully I can get a little bit more done before I eventually sort of give up and go to sleep this evening. So it's now just about 22:11 and I have woken up a little bit, but I'm still feeling kind of tired. So I just reached page 100 of A Little Life, and I think I'm actually going to stop reading there for the evening, just because I'm loving the book so much, but on account of the fact that I kind of keep drifting in and out of tiredness, I don't want to miss any of the details, because I think it is so detail oriented with like the development of the characters and everything, and I'm loving the story and the characters so much so far anyway that I really don't want to miss anything. So I think it'll probably be the most productive if I kind of go to sleep now and then set a really early alarm, because I'm just such a morning person, so I just find it a lot easier to get into reading then. So that is kind of my plan, but so far I am absolutely loving it. I feel like the characters are kind of established a little bit more at this point. So we have, obviously as I mentioned, these four guys who are Willem, Malcolm, JB and Jude, who have just, well, they've not just moved to New York, but they're kind of like living in New York, and that is kind of where the story kicks off. But we're kind of just getting like a little bit of present day narrative, but mostly at the moment it's kind of having a bit of like a backstory thing. And I feel like the character I'm most intrigued about is Jude, because he's being set up as a very mysterious character, and he's definitely the character that is like the most troubled, I'd say, and is the one who I think is probably going to be the centre of a lot of the emotional turmoil that this book is so well known for. And a quote that I just read, literally I think on page like 99, was this. So what did he say? And he had survived another day without divulging any of his secrets, and placed another day between the person he once was and the person he was now. And I just think that is like a very good summary of how interesting and intriguing his character is, because you know full well that there is a big gap in information between like who the character that you're getting to know is and then all of the things that probably happened to the character in their sort of past that kind of like built them up to the character that they are. So that is a really, really great sort of summarising sentence I found anyway, and I really liked how that was written. But yeah, I'm gonna go to sleep now and hopefully get up at around maybe like 6 AM and get started straight away on reading.
Close your eyes, get some rest. I'm by your side, lay your head on my chest.
Good morning guys, it's currently about 8:30 and as predicted I was way more productive with my reading in the morning. I woke up about 6:30ish and just got straight into reading. My pace was still relatively slow just because as books go this is one that has so much detail and also quite a lot of words per page, so my pace is probably a little bit slower than it would be in some other books. But I am now 230 pages into A Little Life, and I can't remember if I mentioned it last night, but this book is split into like 8 no, not 8, 7 volumes or like little sections, and I've just made it to the start of the 3rd section, so it's definitely kind of like ramping up and getting into the story now. But I'm also feeling a little bit nervous because I feel like the book is at a point where there is definitely an undercurrent of kind of like sadness and trauma, I guess, underneath the entire story, particularly surrounding Jude. However, it's also at a point where, despite that trauma, things seem to be going quite well, which normally wouldn't be a cause for like concern. However, given the fact that I know how people say this book just gets really, really emotional, particularly towards the end, I feel like things are going too well, and it's kind of like I feel like it's maybe like setting us up to really, really love the characters and feel like things are going well, so that when something goes wrong it's going to seem even worse. So although I'm really enjoying the story, I am a little bit nervous because I just feel like things are going in too good of a direction and I'm just scared for what is to come. But from the section that I just read, which was the 2nd section called, I think it's called The Postman, there was a little bit that I just really, really enjoyed, which again was kind of sad but still a bit hopeful, I suppose. So we have this character Jude who is very, very troubled, and because of things that have happened in his past which we don't yet really know about and have only been alluded to, we know that he sort of struggles with his sense of like being deserving of friendship and love and things like that. And at one point he has something happen to him and he sort of tries to turn it into a positive, but he's very self-conscious, and this one character who he's friends with affirms what he's saying, and just kind of like Jude is so grateful for it and just so like thankful to have a friend that will say something that he doesn't necessarily agree with just to make him feel better. And it kind of reminded me of In the Perks of Being a Wallflower, when Charlie and Sam are talking about that quote which is like, you accept the love that you think you deserve. And I feel like that really spoke to that kind of quote where he just really needed someone to, I don't know, like build him up, and it was really sort of heartwarming but also sad because it's sad that he needed that. So I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever, but I am definitely enjoying the book, and I'm also really enjoying the exploration of family. So basically this book kind of looks at, again, mostly surrounding Jude, the concept of family that is obviously biological and then family that you choose. And there's one section where another character, Harold, I did tab this but I don't know exactly where it was. Oh yeah, so it's basically on page like 163, it's about like parents and children and the feeling of fear parents have because they don't know what's going to happen to their children all the time. And Harold says, let me tell you 2 other things I learned. The first is that it doesn't matter how old that child is or when or how he became yours. Once you decide to think of someone as your child, something changes, and everything you've previously enjoyed about them, everything you've previously felt for them, is preceded by that fear, which I just thought was a really profound sort of exploration of what it is to be a parent or a caregiver of someone, and just that feeling of both love and fear that involves that relationship. So really enjoying the story, but it is taking me a while to get through just because of all of the detail. So for now it's about 8:30. I'm going to go grab some breakfast and get straight back to reading.
I know you've had a really bad day, but I'm right here, it's gonna be okay. The world could fall down, it's gonna be okay.
Well, I've just reached page 300 and I've cried for the first time, so that's something. It's just kind of like a really sad story. Because basically we've just got to a point where there's 2 characters who are obviously friends or were friends, and it's kind of like coming to a part where the characters are kind of like going their separate ways and everything, and I always just find that really hard to read about. We just recently watched the final ever episode of BoJack Horseman, which is completely unrelated to this, except for in the fact that in that kind of like last couple of episodes it's a lot of like realizations of characters who have sort of grown up with one another and then realised that they've kind of like outgrown each other as friends, and that nearly pushed me over the edge, but this has officially done it. So page 300 is the one that broke me first. So it's now about 10:30 and I've obviously changed out of my pyjamas because I'm just about to head out for a little bit, but I'm still around 300 pages, which is a about halfway into this book, and my thoughts at sort of halfway in are obviously overriding themes. It is sad and I'm still very nervous for what's still to come, because I think we've kind of only just scratched the surface of the sort of darkness that this book is going to delve into. But what I do think is interesting is that obviously from the blurb of this book I thought it was going to be a story of 4 friends who are living in New York and just kind of following their lives, and that is to an extent true. But what I think the book more so is a story of this one guy, Jude, and all of his friends kind of only exist within the story in their relation to him, if you know what I mean. Like, they do have their own things going on, but really their existence is most important in relation to him as the main character. And I definitely do think he is the most compelling character, but I do think it's interesting that there is definitely less of a focus on the individuals and more so on him and how they all build into his overall story, or at least that's how I'm interpreting it anyway. But for now I'm heading out to my mum's house because she actually just came back from France, and I requested that she bring me back some bread because French bread from France is literally the best bread ever in the whole world. So she's brought me back some bread, so I'm gonna go get that, probably have a coffee with her, and then carry on reading later on.
The sun could go out, we're gonna be okay if all the blue skies fade to.
So it's now about 1:30. I've literally just come back from my mum's house and I've got, how many hours is that until 8 o'clock? Like 7.5 hours? 6.5 hours, thanks Jane. Maths is clearly not my strong point. And I've got about half a book left to read, but pretty much that is all I'm planning to do for the rest of the afternoon. So I'm just going to enjoy myself basically, because the weather has taken a turn for the worst. For the last 3 weekends in a row now, every weekend has been super stormy and rainy, which has been great for getting a lot more reading done than I normally do on the weekends, because normally we're out and about doing stuff. But we're just going to spend the afternoon inside whilst it's rainy and windy and just do as much reading as possible. Now, as I mentioned, I went to my mum's to pick up some bread because she's just come back from France, and she brought me back 2 baguettes, and they both look and smell incredible, so I'm so excited to dig into them. So I think I'm going to make myself like a toasty with one, well not a whole baguette obviously, but with some of one of the baguettes for lunch. And I also kind of fancy a hot chocolate because it's just so like windy and cold outside, so I'm going to get that and then start reading.
Great, we're gonna be okay. Calm your soul, hold my hand, don't let go. I understand. It hurts, it wasn't fair.
So it is just after 3 in the afternoon, and I finished up with the 4th part of A Little Life. I think that section was called The Axiom of Equality, and that was a really heavy section. I think it's the longest like bit that I've read so far, and it was really dark. You really delve into a lot of Jude's past and childhood, and it was extremely difficult to read in parts because of a lot of the content was very graphic and just really difficult to read about. But then even the bits that weren't about his childhood and were set in more of the present day were still really difficult to read, and there was just a lot of dark stuff packed into there, and I just think that it was a lot basically. I don't even know really what to say. I feel like it's one of them sections that you kind of need to like decompress after, because especially with it being a bigger section than the other ones I've read, there was just so much packed into it, and it was definitely a really difficult read. It wasn't necessarily emotional in the same sense as some of the earlier parts, but it was just very dark and kind of just like shocking more so than emotional. But yeah, it was interesting I suppose, but really difficult. I'm definitely not wording this in the best way, but it was yeah, I would go into that section with caution because it was very intense. But there were some interesting sections, particularly in the way that it kind of looked into how trauma has affected Jude as a character, because he basically, his entire self-perception has been built by how other people have treated him throughout his whole life. And I feel like that was interesting in the sense of looking at how the way that we're treated by other people really does reflect on how we then feel we deserve to be treated, and it was a very interesting insight into that. But then there was a lot of other stuff going on as well, and it was certainly a dark section of the book, as I've said a few times now, but yeah, it was it's gonna take a while to process that, I feel. But the next section, section 5, is called The Happy Years, and I think I'm gonna go and make a cup of tea before delving into that one, because if the rest of the book is anything to go by, the fact that it's called The Happy Years is probably kind of a misleading title, and I'm a little bit nervous to find out what is gonna happen next.
It's over now, so don't despair. The world could fall down, it's gonna be okay. The sun could go out, we're gonna be okay. If all the blue skies fade to gray, we're gonna be okay.
So I just came to the end of the Happy Years section, which, as predicted, was not particularly happy. Who's surprised? Not me. But basically, yeah, that was an interesting section. It was certainly not as dark as the previous one, which was kind of nice, but it was interesting in the sense that it kind of delved into the theme of happiness in terms of characters like Jude and his friends who are dealing with a lot of darkness, and how for them happiness and finding happiness maybe is slightly different from how you would typically expect people to be happy, if that makes any sense. So it kind of just goes into like these small bits of light in an otherwise sort of dark situation that can make someone who otherwise doesn't have very much happiness a lot happier than it would make someone who had an otherwise perfect life. So it kind of really delves into that sense of happiness and how you can find happiness more easily in certain ways when you've had to deal with such darkness. So that was interesting. I've got just under 100 pages left to go, and it's about 6:30, so I've got an hour and a half left to do them if I'm going to be able to finish this in 24 hours. So I'm just going to get straight away started on finishing, and hopefully I'll get it done by 8 o'clock. Well, it's just after 7:30 and I just finished up reading this book, so yeah, I don't even know what to say right now. I feel like I need time to decompress because this book was just so intense. I'm really glad that I read it, and it's kind of crazy that I read it in 24 hours, but at the same time I feel like it was the kind of book that I would have wanted to read quite quickly anyway, just because the characters are so compelling and you are so intrigued by the story the whole time, but it is obviously a really intense reading experience. But yeah, it was a great book. It was horrible at the same time because it was obviously so sad and because the story dealt with such dark subjects. But I think what's interesting about this one is that even though it does deal with such dark topics, it's not necessarily those issues that are the ones that get to you the most. Obviously, you have these really terrible things happening to characters, but it's not necessarily those terrible things that are the most emotional, because it's in the ways that you as the reader can empathise with the people around the character that's having the terrible things happen to them. So whether that's Jude or any of his friends, whenever something particularly bad is happening to one of them, I think what makes it so emotional is that because you're reading it and seeing the things that are happening to them, you can empathise with their friends and family members, and it's in the way that they react to the story and react to the terrible things that are happening that makes it so emotional. So I'm not sure if that really makes any sense, but I feel like the book really does delve into friendships and relationships in such great depth, and I feel like all of the relationships that are in this book are so well developed, and the characters and the way that they interact with each other and the way that those interactions develop throughout the story is so well developed and so well fleshed out that you are so invested in not only the characters themselves but in the way that the characters have developed relationships with one another. And so I think because those things are so well developed, you can then really get in the shoes of all of the characters. And so when you have these characters that are so devastated to see something bad happening to someone they care about, you can really feel those feelings. And so I think that is the reason why this book is so emotional, because although obviously there's some really dark things happening and those are emotional in and of themselves, they happen with such great frequency that I think you become a little bit desensitized to the events themselves, but you don't become desensitized to the emotions that are felt by all of the characters. And I think that is what makes this book so incredibly compelling, is just how well developed all of the characters and their relationships with each other are. So yeah, wow, what an experience. It's been definitely very different from any of the other 24-hour readathons that I've done, because obviously normally I try and read as many books as I can in one day, whereas this time I picked a slightly bigger and more intense read and just focused on that for one day. And I'm definitely glad that I did it that way, because it was a really interesting book to read and I'm super glad that I finally read it. But yeah, obviously it is just super dark, super intense, but I am really glad to have read it. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I was also buddy reading this one along with Em. I think we've been having a relatively similar reading experience. From what I can gather, I've been enjoying the detail a little bit more than she has, just because I really love long character studies, but overall I think we're having a lot of the same emotions. But she has also vlogged this reading experience, so I'll be sure to link her vlog down below as well, so you can sort of see how she reacted to the book compared to me. But yeah, obviously if you have read this book, please let me know what you thought of it down below, because it's one of those books that I just feel like you can get so much out of, and you could always find new things in it if you reread it. I'm sure I'll definitely reread it when I'm emotionally recovered from this first read. But yeah, if you've read it, definitely let me know what you thought, and I hope you've enjoyed hearing all of my thoughts on this book, because although it was extremely devastating, it was also a really interesting read, and I'm super glad that I've ticked it off my TBR, because it was an incredible book despite all of the darkness within it. I do think it was really well written and I certainly enjoyed it, and I think I'll probably be giving this one 5 stars. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, and hopefully in my next video I won't be crying. So yeah.